I'm sitting in my car, engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The garage door is closed behind me, and I can hear the faint tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that I should go inside. My wife is probably asleep. My daughter's nightlight glows through her bedroom window above me. But I can't move, because if I go inside, I'll have to admit that today happened. That the presentation I spent 3 weeks preparing fell completely flat. That my boss's face did that thing where he tries to hide disappointment but can't. That I nodded and smiled through the feedback meeting while something inside me quietly shattered. The steering wheel is cold under my palms. The leather seat creaks as I shift my weight. Outside, I can hear a neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down. Inside my chest, there's this familiar heaviness, like I'm carrying a weight I can't name but can always feel. And then, without planning to, I do something I haven't done in years. I close my eyes and just listen to the ticking engine, to the distant barking, to my own breath, to the silence between sounds. 3 minutes pass, maybe 5. I lose track. When I open my eyes, something has shifted, not fixed, not solved, just shifted, like a door I didn't know was there is opened a crack, and through it comes the faintest breeze of something I can't quite name. Peace, maybe, or just space. Space between me and the weight that I go inside. Kiss my sleeping daughter's forehead. Slide into bed next to my wife. And for the first time in months, I fall asleep without replaying every mistake I've ever made. That was 4 years ago. That moment in my car changed everything, but not in the way you might think. It didn't solve my problems. Didn't make me successful overnight. Didn't turn me into some Zen master who never feels stress. What it did was show me something that I'm going to share with you over the next 3 hours. Something so simple that you'll probably dismiss it at first. Something so powerful that it will change everything if you let it. Here's the truth. Your reality isn't created by what happens to you. It's created by what you listen to. And I don't mean podcasts or music or advice from friends. I mean the constant, relentless stream of thoughts, judgments, fears, and stories that run through your mind every single moment of every single day. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's a voice in your head. Maybe it's agreeing with me. Maybe it's skeptical. Maybe it's already thinking about what you need to do after this. That voice has been running nonstop since you woke up this morning. Since before you woke up, actually. It was probably the first thing you heard today, and that voice? It's building your reality, brick by brick, thought by thought, story by story. But here's what most people never discover. You can change what you listen to. And when you change what you listen to, you change your reality. Not in 90 days. Not in a year. In 21 days. I know that sounds impossible. Or like another empty promise from another self-help program. But I'm going to prove it to you. Not with theory, not with abstract concepts. With a simple practice that takes 1 hour every night for 21 days. 1 hour. Every night. For 3 weeks, that's it. That's the entire requirement. And by day 22, you will wake up in a different reality. Not because the world changed, because you finally learned how to listen. Are you ready? Then let's begin. Chapter 1. The voice you've never questioned. At its 6:23 a.m. Your alarm hasn't gone off yet, but you're already awake. Your eyes are still closed, but your mind is already moving. Already talking. I'm tired. I didn't sleep enough. Why did I stay up so late? I have that meeting today. Did I prepare enough? I should have prepared more. What if they ask about the numbers? I need to check my email. No, I should exercise first. But I'm so tired. Maybe just coffee. I'll exercise tomorrow. I always say that. Why can't I just? The voice talks so fast you don't even notice it's talking. It's been your constant companion for so long that you think it's just you. That this is what consciousness is. This stream of commentary, judgment, worry, planning, remembering, regretting. You open your eyes. The ceiling is the same as yesterday, the same as it will be tomorrow. But already, in these first 3 minutes of waking, that voice has painted today with a particular color. Tired, behind, not enough, and you haven't even gotten out of bed. You swing your legs to the floor. Your feet touch the cold hardwood. Your phone is on the nightstand, screen glowing with notifications. The voice speeds up point 12 messages. What happened? Is something wrong? No, probably just group chat nonsense. But what if it's work? I should check. No, shower first. But what if? This is the voice I'm talking about. The one that's been running your life without you ever questioning whether you should listen to it. The one that right now, even as you hear my words, is commenting on them, analyzing, judging, planning what to think next. And here's what I need you to understand. This voice isn't you. It's something you listen to, and you can choose to listen differently. Let me tell you why this matters and why you've never been taught this before. When you were born, you didn't have this voice. You experienced the world directly. When you were hungry, you felt hunger and cried. When you were held, you felt warmth and comfort. There was no narration, no story, no commentary about whether you should feel what you were feeling or whether you were doing it right. Then language came. And with language came the voice. At first, it was your parents' voices. External. Don't touch that. Be careful. What a good boy. Why can't you be more like your sister? These voices became internalized. They became the foundation of the voice you now hear as you. By the time you were 7 or 8, the voice was fully installed. A constant narrator, commentator, judge, and advisor. And everyone around you had the same voice in their head, so nobody questioned it. Your teachers had it. Your parents had it. Everyone just assumed this was normal. This was consciousness. This was life. But here's what nobody told you. The voice isn't neutral. It isn't objective. It isn't even particularly helpful most of the time. I learned this the hard way. I was 28 when I had my first panic attack. I was in a meeting, presenting quarterly results, and suddenly my heart started racing. My hands went numb. The room tilted slightly to the left, and the voice in my head went into overdrive that something's wrong. Really wrong. You're having a heart attack. No, you're dying. Everyone can see it. They're staring at you. You need to get out. But if you leave, they'll know you're weak. You'll lose everything. Just breathe. Why can't you breathe? Something is seriously wrong with you. The attack lasted maybe 90 seconds. But it felt like forever. Because the voice turned 90 seconds of physical sensation into an entire catastrophic story about my health, my competence, my future, and my worth as a human being. After that, the attacks came regularly. 3 times a week, sometimes more. Each time, the same pattern. Physical sensation triggers. Voice creates catastrophic story. Body responds to the story with more physical sensation. Voice escalates the story. A perfect feedback loop of suffering. I tried everything. Medication, therapy, meditation apps, breathing exercises. Some things helped a little. Nothing really changed. Because I was still believing that the voice was me, that the stories it told were true, that I needed to listen to it, engage with it, fix what it said was wrong. Then one night, exhausted from another day of constant anxiety, I had an accidental breakthrough. I was lying in bed, heart racing again, voice spiraling, and I was just too tired. Too tired to engage. Too tired to fight. Too tired to even care. And in that exhaustion, I noticed something I'd never noticed before. The voice was talking, and I was listening. But these were two separate things. The voice said, "Your heart is racing. Something's wrong." And instead of believing it, I heard it. Just heard it. Like I was listening to someone else's commentary on a sporting event. The voice continued, "You should be worried. This could be serious." And I just kept listening, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just listening. My heart kept racing. The voice kept talking, but I stayed in this strange new position of listener rather than believer. And slowly, over the next few minutes, something remarkable happened. The voice ran out of material. It repeated itself a few times. Then it got quieter. Then it stopped. And my heart rate naturally returned to normal. Not because I fixed anything. Not because I did a breathing technique or challenged the thoughts or used any strategy. Simply because I stopped treating the voice as a source of truth and started treating it as a source of sound. That's when I realized I'd been listening to the wrong thing my entire life. Here's what I mean by listening to the wrong thing. Every moment, you're receiving two types of information. There's direct experience, what you actually see, hear, feel, taste, and touch right now. And there's mental commentary, what the voice says about what you're experiencing. Most people spend 95% of their attention on the commentary and 5% on the direct experience. They're living in the story about life rather than in life itself. Think about the last meal you ate. Do you remember tasting it? Really tasting it? Or were you scrolling through your phone, planning your afternoon, replaying a conversation from earlier? The food went into your mouth. You chewed and swallowed, but you weren't really there. You were listening to the voice tell you stories about other moments. This is what I call living in the voice. And it's exhausting because the voice is never satisfied. It's always finding problems, making comparisons, creating scenarios to worry about. Even when things are going well, it says, "Yes, but what about?" Or "This won't last," or "You don't deserve this." I had a client, Marcus, who came to me because he couldn't enjoy anything anymore. He'd just gotten a promotion he'd worked toward for 5 years. Better title, better pay, more respect, everything he thought he wanted. But he felt nothing. Emptiness. Sometimes dread. In our first session, I asked him to describe getting the promotion. He told me the story, the email from his boss, the congratulations from colleagues, the celebration dinner with his wife. He recounted every detail. Then I asked, "When you read the email, what did you feel in your body?" He paused. "I don't remember exactly. I think relief. Maybe." "And what was the voice in your head saying?" Immediately, he remembered. It said, "Finally. But now you have to prove you deserve this. Everyone will be watching. What if you mess up? This is more responsibility, more pressure, more ways to fail." The promotion happened, but Marcus never experienced it. He was too busy listening to the voice tell him stories about what might go wrong in the future. The moment of achievement passed through his life without him actually being there for it. This is what the voice does. It pulls you out of now and into imaginary futures and replayed pasts. And because you're listening to it instead of experiencing life directly, you miss your own life. You miss the taste of your food, the feeling of your daughter's hand in yours, the color of the sunset, the satisfaction of completion. All of it passes by while you're listening to commentary about it instead of experiencing it. But here's the crucial part. You can change this. Not by stopping the voice. That's impossible. and trying just creates more suffering, but by changing your relationship to it, by recognizing that you don't have to believe everything it says, you don't have to follow every suggestion, you don't have to let it determine your reality. You can listen to it the way you'd listen to a radio playing in another room. It's there. You can hear it, but you're not absorbed in it. You're not treating it as the truth about reality. You're just listening from a distance, with curiosity rather than belief. This shift from believer to listener is the first and most important step in the 21-day journey. And it starts tonight. Let me give you some examples of what this looks like in practice. The voice says, "You're going to fail at this." As a believer, you feel fear and start preparing for failure. As a listener, you notice, there's the failure story again, and continue with your task. The voice says, "They definitely don't like you." As a believer, you replay every interaction looking for evidence. As a listener, you notice, the voice is making assumptions about other people's thoughts and let it pass. The voice says, "You should be further along by now." As a believer, you spiral into comparison and shame. As a listener, you notice, the voice is comparing me to an imaginary timeline, and return to what you're actually doing. The voice says, "This moment isn't enough." As a believer, you reach for your phone, plan the next thing, try to add more. As a listener, you notice, the voice wants me somewhere other than here, and feel your feet on the ground. See the pattern? The voice keeps talking, but your relationship to it shifts from engagement to observation, from believing to noticing, from being controlled to being aware. This is the skill we'll build over 21 days. Tonight, you'll begin with the simplest practice. Just notice the voice. Not to change it or fix it or make it stop. Just to hear it the way you might hear a bird singing outside your window. It's there. You can hear it, but you don't have to follow it into the trees. Chapter 2. The voice is trying to save your life. I'm 7 years old, standing at the edge of the high dive. The pool stretches out below me, impossibly far away. The concrete under my bare feet is rough and hot from the summer sun. Behind me, there's a line of kids waiting their turn. In front of me, there's just air and water and the certainty that I'm going to die. The voice is screaming, "Don't do it. You'll get hurt. You'll embarrass yourself. Everyone's watching. You're going to look stupid. Just go back down the ladder. It's safer. It's smarter. Don't jump." I stand there for what feels like an hour. It's probably 30 seconds. I can hear my older brother yelling something from the pool. I can feel the judgment of the kids behind me, their impatience building. I can smell the chlorine and sunscreen and hot concrete. And then I jump. The falling is terrible. The voice screams all the way down. The water hits hard, cold, shocking. I go under, disoriented. Then up, gasping, alive, laughing. I did it. I survived. The voice was wrong. I swim to the edge, and already the voice has changed its story. See, that wasn't so bad. You should do it again. But this time, do a better entry. That was sloppy. People noticed. Try harder next time. Even in victory, the voice finds a problem. Because that's its job. Not to help you thrive. To help you survive. And there's a massive difference between those two things. This is what you need to understand about the voice. It's not evil. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to save your life. The problem is, it thinks everything is life or death. And in our modern world, that's rarely true. Your voice developed thousands of years ago when humans faced actual daily threats to survival. Predators, starvation, exposure, hostile tribes. In that environment, the humans who survived were the ones whose brains constantly scanned for danger, remembered past threats, and planned for future ones. The voice evolved as your survival mechanism. Its job was simple: keep you alive. And the way it kept you alive was by making you afraid. Afraid of the rustling in the bushes that might be a leopard. Afraid of the stranger from another tribe. Afraid of the unknown berries that might be poisonous. Fear kept you cautious. Caution kept you alive. But here's the problem: the voice never evolved past this. It still operates like you're living in a survival situation every single day. It still treats a difficult conversation with your boss the same way it would treat a leopard in the bushes. It still interprets social rejection as exile from the tribe, which, thousands of years ago, was literally life-threatening to us. Oh, when you're about to send an important email, the voice says, "Wait, read it again. Check for errors. What if you said something wrong? What if they misunderstand? What if this damages your reputation?" It's trying to save you from exile, from being cast out, from dying alone on the savannah. When you're about to try something new, the voice says, "Don't. You might fail. You might look foolish. You might get hurt. Stay here. Stay safe. Stay small." It's trying to protect you from the unknown, which in ancient times often contained death. When you're lying in bed at night, the voice says, "Remember that embarrassing thing you did 15 years ago? What if people still remember? What about that deadline next week? What if you miss it? What if you get sick? What if, what if, what if?" It's trying to prepare you for every possible threat, the way your ancestors had to prepare for predators that hunted at night. That I discovered this mechanism in a particularly painful way. After my panic attack started, I became terrified of having panic attacks. The voice would say things like, "What if you have an attack during the presentation? What if it happens while you're driving? What if it happens and you can't escape? You need to avoid situations where it might happen." So I started avoiding. I stopped going to meetings, stopped accepting speaking opportunities, stopped traveling. My world got smaller and smaller, and the voice kept telling me this was the right move. This was safety. This was smart. But one day, my daughter asked me to come to her school play. 3rd grade. She had a small part, 3 lines. And the voice immediately said, "No, too risky. Too many people. What if you have an attack in the auditorium? You'll embarrass her. You'll traumatize her. Stay home. It's safer." I almost listened, almost told her I couldn't make it. But then I saw her face, the hope in her eyes, the excitement, and I realized something. The voice was trying to save my life in a situation where my life wasn't in danger. It was trying to protect me from discomfort by having me abandon my daughter. Its solution to imaginary danger was real damage to what actually mattered to us. Oh, I went. And yes, halfway through the play, my heart started racing. The voice started its catastrophic commentary. But I just sat there, in the uncomfortable sensations, in the panicked thoughts, and I watched my daughter say her 3 lines, watched her face light up when she saw me in the audience afterward. Experienced the moment instead of fleeing from it. The attack passed. It always does. But the memory of my daughter's joy, that stayed. That mattered. That was real. That night, I understood. The voice means well, but it's working with outdated information. And if you let it run your life, you'll end up safe but small. Protected but not alive. That here's the deeper truth about the voice that most people never understand. The voice doesn't know the difference between physical danger and psychological discomfort. To the voice, embarrassment feels like death. Rejection feels like death. Uncertainty feels like death. Failure feels like death. Because in the ancient environment where the voice developed, These things often led to actual death. If you were embarrassed in front of the tribe, you might be ostracized. Ostracism meant survival odds dropped dramatically. So your brain learned to treat social embarrassment as a survival threat. Same intensity of alarm. Same physiological response. Fight, flight, or freeze. This means that right now, in modern life, your voice treats dozens of completely safe situations as life-threatening emergencies. Someone disagrees with you in a meeting? Emergency. They might think you're wrong. You might lose status. You might be vulnerable to attack. You make a mistake at work? Emergency. Your competence is in question. Your position is threatened. You might lose resources needed for survival that you're alone on a Saturday night. Emergency. You're isolated from the social group. You're vulnerable. You need to secure connection immediately. Your friend doesn't text back within an hour? Emergency. The relationship might be damaged. You might be rejected. You need to figure out what went wrong and fix it. None of these situations are actually dangerous, but the voice treats them like they are. And when you believe the voice, you respond to everyday life as if you're constantly under attack, which creates chronic stress, anxiety, and a persistent sense that something is wrong. That I had a client, Jennifer, who couldn't stop checking her email. Every few minutes, refresh. Throughout dinner, during conversations, in the middle of the night. She knew it was compulsive. She hated it, but she couldn't stop. When we explored what the voice was saying, it became clear. The voice told her, if you don't check, you might miss something urgent. Someone might be upset with you. Someone might be waiting for an answer. The longer you wait, the worse it gets. Check. Now. Again. Again. The voice was treating email like a potential predator, something that might attack if she wasn't vigilant, something that required constant monitoring to stay safe. The anxiety she felt wasn't about email. It was the ancient alarm system responding to what it perceived as a survival threat. Once Jennifer understood this, she could start relating to the urge differently. When the voice said, check your email, she could recognize, oh, that's the survival voice. It thinks email is dangerous. It's trying to protect me from something that isn't actually a threat. This didn't make the urge disappear, but it created space between her and the compulsion. The voice still suggested checking, but she didn't have to believe it was life or death. She could acknowledge the urge and choose differently. Over a few weeks, the compulsion loosened, not because she fought it, not because she used willpower to resist, but because she stopped treating the voice's assessment of danger as accurate. She recognized it was a false alarm, a survival mechanism misfiring in a modern context. This is what I mean when I say the voice is trying to save your life. It genuinely is. But it's using a threat detection system designed for a world that no longer exists. And when you don't recognize this, you live in constant low-level fear, treating ordinary life like enemy territory. The way out isn't to eliminate the voice. It's to update your relationship with it. To say, thank you for trying to protect me, but I'm actually safe. And I'm going to choose based on what matters, not based on what you fear. Here's how this plays out in everyday moments. The voice says, don't speak up in the meeting. You might say something stupid. Recognition. The survival voice thinks speaking is dangerous. Reality. I might contribute something valuable, and even if I don't, it's not a survival threat. The voice says, you need to figure this out right now. Recognition. The survival voice thinks uncertainty is dangerous. Reality. I can tolerate not knowing while I gather more information. The voice says, they're definitely mad at you. Recognition. The survival voice is scanning for social threats. Reality. I'm making up a story. I could just ask directly. The voice says, you should have done this differently. Recognition. The survival voice is reviewing for mistakes to prevent future danger. Reality. I did my best with what I knew then. I can learn without shame. The voice says, what if everything goes wrong? Recognition. The survival voice is catastrophizing to prepare for danger. Reality. Most catastrophes never happen, and I can handle challenges as they arise that you're not dismissing the voice. You're understanding its function. And from that understanding, you can choose whether to follow its guidance or not. Tonight's practice builds on this understanding. You'll learn to recognize when the voice is in survival mode, when it's treating safety like danger, discomfort like death. Not to argue with it, not to convince it otherwise, just to notice, there's the survival voice. It's doing its job, but I don't have to follow it. Chapter 3. There's another voice. It's 2 a.m. on a random Thursday. I'm sitting in the nursery, holding my 3-month-old daughter. She's finally asleep after 2 hours of crying. Colic, the doctor said. Nothing to do but wait it out. My arms ache. My eyes burn with exhaustion. My wife is sleeping after her shift with the baby. It's my turn now. The survival voice has been running for hours. This is too hard. You're not equipped for this. You're going to mess this up. She won't stop crying because you're doing something wrong. You're failing at the most basic thing a father should do. Why did you think you could do this? You're not ready. You're not enough. The voice is relentless, harsh, certain of my inadequacy, and I'm too tired to fight it, too tired to challenge it, too tired to even care if it's right to I just sit there, holding my daughter, feeling her tiny chest rise and fall against mine, hearing her occasional soft sounds, smelling that indescribable baby smell that's milk and powder and something indefinable, feeling the weight of her in my arms, solid and real and impossibly precious, and beneath the survival voice, beneath its commentary and judgment and fear, I hear something else. Not a voice exactly, more like a knowing, a deep, quiet certainty that has no words, but is somehow clearer than any words could be. The knowing says nothing about my adequacy, nothing about whether I'm doing it right or wrong. It just says, this matters. This moment, right here, is what matters. This is what you're alive for, not in words, but in a feeling that fills my chest. A sense of rightness that exists completely independent of whether I'm doing it well or poorly. A truth that doesn't need the survival voice's approval or permission. That was the first time I clearly heard what I now call the deeper voice. And everything changed. Most people don't know there are two voices. They think the survival voice, the constant commentator we explored in chapters 1 and 2, is the only voice, the only source of guidance, the only way to know what to do. But there's another voice, quieter, deeper, older. It doesn't speak in words the way the survival voice does. It speaks in feelings, intuitions, knowings. It doesn't shout or demand or create urgency. It whispers. And most people never hear it because they're too busy listening to the survival voice that I call it the deeper voice. But that's just my term. You might call it intuition, wisdom, inner knowing, your true self, your gut, the still small voice. Whatever you call it, it's the part of you that knows what actually matters. Not what's urgent, not what's safe. What matters, the survival voice asks. Is this dangerous? Will this keep me safe? What might go wrong? The deeper voice asks, is this true? Is this what I'm here for? Does this align with what matters? These are completely different questions. and they lead to completely different lives. Here's how I learned this distinction in a way I couldn't ignore: that I was 32 when I got offered a promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years. VP role, significant pay increase, team of 15 people reporting to me. Everything the survival voice had been telling me I needed: more security, more status, more proof of worth, more resources, more, more. The day I got the offer, I should have been thrilled. Instead, I felt nothing, empty. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that the excitement would come. I accepted the position. My first week in the new role, I woke up every morning with a knot in my stomach. The survival voice said, "It's just nervousness, new job jitters. You'll adjust." But underneath that voice, there was something else, a quiet but persistent feeling that something was off. Not wrong exactly, just off. I ignored it. For 6 months, I ignored it. I let the survival voice convince me that the tightness in my chest was just stress I needed to manage better, that the sense of wrongness was just imposter syndrome I needed to overcome, that the persistent whisper of "this isn't it" was just fear of success. Then one Saturday morning, I'm reading to my daughter. She's 4 now. We're on the couch, and she's pressed against my side, completely absorbed in the story. And I'm reading the words, but I'm not there. I'm thinking about work, about the presentation Monday, about the conflict with one of my direct reports, about the budget review, about everything except this moment with my daughter. She looks up at me and says, "Daddy, you're not doing the voices." She's right. I've been reading in a monotone, not the animated character voices she loves. I apologize, try again, but my heart isn't in it. And I see this little flash of disappointment cross her face before she settles back against me. That flash of disappointment broke something open, because in that moment, the deeper voice wasn't quiet anymore. It was loud, crystal clear, and it said, "You're giving your real life to a job that doesn't fit so you can buy a life you don't have time to live." Not criticism, not judgment, just truth. Clear, undeniable truth that I didn't quit the next day. I'm not suggesting some dramatic movie moment, but I heard the deeper voice clearly for the first time in months, and I couldn't unhear it. Over the next few months, I made changes. Big ones. Stepped back from the VP role. Took a different position with less prestige, but more alignment. Less money, but more time. Less status, but more life. The survival voice freaked out. Told me I was making a huge mistake. That I was giving up security. Disappointing people. Failing. Going backward. The survival voice was terrified. But the deeper voice just kept saying, "This is the way. This is true. This is what you're here for." And it was right. Here's what I've learned about these two voices over years of working with clients and my own practice. The survival voice is fast, loud, and certain. It jumps to conclusions, makes immediate assessments, speaks in absolutes. This is definitely going to fail. They're obviously upset with you. You have to do this now. It creates urgency and demands action. The deeper voice is slow, quiet, and patient. It doesn't jump, doesn't demand, doesn't create false urgency. It waits until you're ready to listen. And when it speaks, it doesn't use absolutes. It uses gentle certainties. Something's not quite right here. This matters to you. Wait. Yes. Not this. This way. The survival voice speaks in fear. The deeper voice speaks in truth. The survival voice is concerned with what might happen. The deeper voice is concerned with what is. The survival voice tries to control outcomes. The deeper voice invites you to trust the process. I had a client, David, who was stuck in a marriage that had been dead for years. No abuse. No dramatic problems. Just nothing. Two people sharing a house, but living separate lives. The survival voice told him to stay. Divorce is risky. Expensive. What if you're alone forever? What if you regret it? Better to stay. It's not that bad. Other people have it worse. You're being selfish. Think of the house, the friends, the family reactions. Stay. Safe. Don't disrupt. But the deeper voice, the one he could barely hear under the survival noise, kept whispering, "This isn't alive. You're not alive here. There's more. Not somewhere else, necessarily, but more than this half-life. This pretending. This slow death of settling." For 3 years, the survival voice won. David stayed, convinced himself it was the responsible choice, the mature choice, the safe choice. Meanwhile, he gained 40 pounds, started drinking more, stopped seeing friends, stopped doing the things he loved, slowly disappeared into a life that looked fine from the outside but was hollow inside. Then his father died. Sudden heart attack at 63. And at the funeral, David heard himself thinking, he never did the thing he really wanted. He talked about it sometimes, but he never did it. And now he's gone. And that dream is gone with him. Something cracked open. The deeper voice, which had been whispering for years, suddenly spoke clearly. You get one life. This one. Right now, you're living it. This is it. And you're spending it in a life that isn't true. David still didn't leave immediately. But he heard the deeper voice clearly now. He couldn't unhear it. Within 6 months, he and his wife had the conversation they'd both been avoiding. They separated kindly, honestly, both relieved to finally acknowledge what had been true for years. The survival voice predicted disaster. David predicted suffering, loneliness, regret. None of that happened. What happened was, David came back to life. Not because he found someone new. Not because being alone was better than being married. But because he finally listened to the truth instead of the fear. 2 years later, sitting in my office, he told me, I didn't leave the marriage to find happiness. I left because staying meant abandoning myself. And once I understood that, there was no choice anymore. There was just the truth. And the truth was, I'd rather be alone and alive than together and dead inside. That's the deeper voice. It doesn't promise happiness. It doesn't guarantee ease. It doesn't even promise that things will work out the way you want. It just points to what's true. And when you follow truth instead of fear, you become real. You come alive. Even when it's hard, here's how to recognize which voice is speaking. The survival voice says, you need to figure this out right now. The deeper voice says, the answer will come when you're ready. The survival voice says, everyone will judge you. The deeper voice says, what matters is whether this is true for you. The survival voice says, but what if it doesn't work? The deeper voice says, what if you never try? The survival voice says, this is too risky. The deeper voice says, what you're doing now is the biggest risk of all. The survival voice says, you should be further along. The deeper voice says, you're exactly where you need to be. The survival voice says, you're not enough. The deeper voice says, you've always been enough. The survival voice speaks from fear of the future or regret about the past. The deeper voice speaks from truth in the present moment. The survival voice contracts your world to keep you safe. The deeper voice expands your world to keep you alive. Learning to distinguish between these voices is the most important skill you'll develop in these 21 days. Tonight's practice introduces you to the deeper voice. You'll learn how to find the quiet beneath the noise, how to sense the difference between fear's commentary and truth's whisper. This isn't about silencing the survival voice. That's impossible and unnecessary. It's about creating enough space to hear what else is present. Chapter 4. Why You're Afraid of the Truth. I'm standing in the kitchen at 11 p.m., staring into the open refrigerator. I'm not hungry. I ate dinner 2 hours ago. But here I am, looking for something. Not food. Something else. Something to fill a feeling I don't want to feel. The survival voice says, "You're just hungry. Have a snack. You've been working hard. You deserve it." But underneath that, so quiet I can barely hear it, the deeper voice says, "You're not hungry. You're lonely. And you're eating instead of acknowledging it." I close the refrigerator. Open it again. Look at the same items I looked at 30 seconds ago. The humming of the appliance fills the silence. The kitchen light is too bright. My reflection in the window shows me standing there, frozen between two knowings. One comfortable and false. One uncomfortable and true. The survival voice gets louder. Just have something. It's not a big deal. You're overthinking this. It's just a snack. It's trying to help me avoid the uncomfortable truth that's waiting just beneath the surface. But I stay with the discomfort. I let the deeper voice speak fully. You're lonely because you've been working 70 hours a week. You miss your wife. You miss actually talking to her, not just coordinating schedules. You miss feeling connected. And you've been eating your feelings for 3 months instead of addressing them. I close the refrigerator. Walk away. Sit on the couch in the dark. And just feel it. The loneliness. The disconnection. The truth I've been avoiding with food and work and busyness and distraction, that it's uncomfortable. But it's real. And once I acknowledge it, I can do something about it. Not tonight. My wife is already asleep. But tomorrow, I can initiate a real conversation. Can suggest we protect one evening a week. Can actually address what's true instead of medicating what hurts. This is why people are afraid of the deeper voice. Because it tells the truth. And the truth often requires change. Here's what nobody tells you about listening to the deeper voice. It will disrupt your life. Not always dramatically. Not always immediately. But inevitably. Deeply. Meaningfully. Because the deeper voice doesn't care about your carefully constructed, comfortable life. It doesn't care about the image you've built, the expectations you're meeting, the role you're playing, the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you want. The deeper voice only cares about truth. And truth is disruptive. This is why most people spend their entire lives listening only to the survival voice. Not because the survival voice is more helpful. It's not. Not because the survival voice leads to better outcomes. It doesn't. But because the survival voice promises to keep your current life intact. It might keep you stressed, anxious, unfulfilled, and half alive. But at least it keeps things familiar, predictable, controllable. The deeper voice offers no such promise. The deeper voice says things like, "This job isn't you. This relationship has become a habit. You're pretending to want things you don't actually want. The life you're living is the life you think you should want, not the life you actually want." And once you hear those truths clearly, you can't unhear them. You can ignore them, suppress them, distract yourself from them. But you can't unknow what you now know to be true. I learned this the hard way when I was 35. I'd built what looked like a successful life. Good job, nice house, happy marriage, healthy daughter. Everything checked all the boxes. Everything looked right from the outside. And most of the time, I could convince myself it was right. But there was this persistent discomfort, like wearing a shirt that's one size too small. Not painful exactly, just wrong. tight, constricting. And every few weeks, usually late at night, the deeper voice would whisper, "You're performing. You've been performing for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to be real." I hated hearing that because I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't just quit my job, abandon my responsibilities, blow up my life. I had people depending on me, obligations, a mortgage, a daughter who needed stability. The survival voice was very clear about all of this. So I ignored the deeper voice, threw myself into work, into being a good husband, a good father, a good employee, into doing everything right. And the more I performed, the more exhausted I became, the more resentful, the more distant from my own life. Then one Saturday, my daughter, 7 years old now, asked me to play a game with her. I said yes, but in my head, I was already thinking about the emails I needed to answer, the project plan I needed to review, the call I needed to prepare for. I was physically present but mentally absent that we played for maybe 15 minutes. Then she put down her game piece and said, "Daddy, where are you?" She wasn't asking where I was physically. She was asking where I was. Me, the actual person, the one who wasn't performing, the one who was actually present. And I didn't have an answer because I didn't know where I was. I'd been performing for so long that I'd lost track of the person underneath the performance. That night, after she went to bed, the deeper voice spoke with a clarity I couldn't ignore. "You're teaching her that the way to live is to be somewhere other than where you are. That success means abandoning yourself for the sake of appearing successful. That love means performing rather than being present. Is that really what you want to teach her?" It wasn't a criticism. It was a question, a true question, and I couldn't avoid answering it anymore. That was the beginning of the most difficult year of my life. Not because external things fell apart, they didn't, but because I had to face how much of my life was performance and how little was presence. How much was what I thought I should do and how little was what I actually wanted. How much was fear-driven and how little was truth-driven. The deeper voice didn't make any of this easier, but it made it necessary. It made it real. It made it mine. Here's what makes the deeper voice so threatening to the survival mechanism. The survival voice operates on fear and control. Its entire function is to keep you safe by keeping things predictable. It does this by creating rigid rules about how life should be, what success looks like, what you should want, what you should do, what you should become. These rules create a kind of prison, but it's a prison that feels safe. You know where the walls are. You know what's expected. You know how to perform your role. And as long as you stay within those walls, the survival voice stays relatively quiet. But the deeper voice doesn't respect these walls. It doesn't care about the rules the survival voice has built. It only cares about what's true. And what's true is often outside the walls, often beyond what the survival voice has deemed safe. So when you start listening to the deeper voice, the survival voice panics. It interprets any deviation from its rules as danger. And it responds the way it always responds to danger, with fear, urgency, and loud warnings. I had a client, Sarah, who had this experience powerfully. She'd been working in corporate law for 12 years, made partner at 34, six-figure salary, prestige, security. Everything the survival voice told her meant she'd succeeded, but she was miserable, genuinely, deeply miserable. She drank too much, slept too little, had stress-induced health problems. And every Sunday night, she'd feel this crushing dread about Monday morning. The deeper voice kept whispering, "This isn't your life. This is someone else's idea of what your life should be. You became a lawyer because it seemed impressive, because it made your parents proud, because it looked like success. But it's not you. It's never been you. For years, Sarah ignored this voice. The survival voice was much louder. But you've invested 12 years. You just made partner. You can't throw that away. What would you do instead? What would people think? You're being ungrateful. You're being immature. You're being foolish. Stay. It's safe here. You know how to do this. Then she turned 36. Something about that birthday hit her differently. She realized she could easily do this job for another 30 years. Easily make more money. Easily continue succeeding by every external measure. And easily be miserable for 3 more decades. The deeper voice spoke clearly. You can continue this. But every day you continue, you're choosing this emptiness. You're choosing to abandon what you actually care about. You're choosing fear over truth. And that choice costs something. It costs you. That clarity was terrifying, because Sarah knew what she actually wanted. She'd always known. She wanted to work with kids, specifically kids in the foster system. She'd thought about it for years but dismissed it as impractical, unrealistic, naive. The survival voice had convinced her it was a nice fantasy but not a real option. But now the deeper voice was clear. It's not a fantasy. It's what you care about. It's what would make you feel alive. And you've spent 12 years pretending that doesn't matter. Sarah didn't quit the next day, but she couldn't unhear the truth. Over the next year, she trained as a child advocate, started volunteering, built skills, made a plan, and eventually made the transition. The survival voice predicted disaster, predicted she'd regret it, predicted financial ruin and professional embarrassment and crushing disappointment. None of that happened. What happened was, Sarah came alive. She made less money, had less prestige, worked harder in many ways. But she was finally doing what mattered to her. Finally living her actual life instead of the life she thought she should live. The deeper voice doesn't promise easy. It promises true. And true is what makes you alive. Here's how fear of truth shows up in everyday life. You know you need to have a difficult conversation, but you avoid it. The survival voice says, wait for the right time. The deeper voice says, you're afraid of the discomfort, but the conversation needs to happen. You know you're in the wrong career, but you stay. The survival voice says, you've invested too much to change. The deeper voice says, you're investing your life in something that doesn't fit. You know you're drinking too much, but you rationalize it. The survival voice says, everyone does it. The deeper voice says, you're medicating something you need to address. You know you're not being honest with your partner, but you keep pretending. The survival voice says, honesty will hurt them. The deeper voice says, dishonesty is hurting both of you. You know you're playing small, but you stay safe. The survival voice says, what if you fail? The deeper voice says, what if you never try? Every time you choose the survival voice's comfort over the deeper voice's truth, you abandon yourself a little more. Every time you choose truth, you come back to yourself. Tonight's practice asks you to identify one truth you've been avoiding. Not to fix it immediately, not to make drastic changes, just to acknowledge it. To let the deeper voice speak without the survival voice drowning it out. To practice being with uncomfortable truth instead of running from it. Chapter 5. Listening is not thinking. I'm sitting on my back porch at dawn. Coffee in hand. Birds starting their morning sounds. The sky is that perfect gradient of deep blue to soft orange. The air is cool and still. Everything is exactly right for a moment of peace. Except I'm not experiencing any of it. because I'm not actually here. My body is on the porch. My eyes see the sunrise. My hands feel the warm mug. But I'm not present. I'm in my head, thinking about the sunrise, analyzing it, comparing it to other sunrises, wondering if I should take a picture, thinking about how I'll describe this moment to my wife, planning how to use this peaceful start to tackle my to-do list efficiently. I'm thinking about the moment instead of being I in the moment. And I do this constantly, all day, every day. I mistake thinking about life for actually living it. I mistake analyzing experience for having experience. I mistake planning to be present for actually being present. The survival voice is entirely comfortable with this. It loves thinking. Thinking feels productive. Thinking feels like you're doing something. Thinking keeps you one step removed from direct experience, which means you're always slightly protected from really feeling anything too intensely. But the deeper voice knows something the survival voice doesn't. Thinking about your life is not the same as living it. Analyzing the sunrise is not the same as experiencing the sunrise. Planning to be present is not the same as being present, and listening, real listening, is not thinking at all. I put down my coffee, stop the mental commentary, and actually look at the sky, not thinking about the colors, just seeing them, not comparing them to anything, just experiencing them, not planning what to do with this moment, just being in it. For maybe 10 seconds, I'm actually there. No thoughts, no commentary, no analysis. Just me and the sky and the birds and the coffee and the cool air. Just this. Just now. Just real. Then the survival voice returns. That was nice. You should do that more often. You should tell people about this. You should. And I'm gone again. Back in my head. Back in thinking about instead of being with. This is the practice. This is the work. Not achieving some permanent state of presence. Just recognizing the difference between thinking about life and actually living it. Between analyzing experience and having experience. Between listening with your mind and listening with your whole being. Most people think listening means hearing words and processing them mentally. They think listening is a function of the mind, something you do with your thoughts, an activity of analysis and comprehension and interpretation. But that's not listening. That's thinking about what you're hearing. There's a massive difference. Real listening, the kind of listening that changes your reality, happens before thought. It happens in the space where experience meets awareness before the mind jumps into label, categorize, judge, or interpret. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, as you hear these words, notice what's happening. There's the sound of my voice. And then there's your mental response to the sound. Your agreement or disagreement. Your analysis. Your connection to your own experiences. Your planning of what you think about what I'm saying. That mental response is not listening. That's thinking. Listening is the moment before the mental response. The pure receiving of sound before your mind turns it into meaning. This distinction seems subtle, but it changes everything. Because when you're thinking about what you're hearing, you're not actually present with what you're hearing. You're one step removed. You're in your interpretation of reality rather than in reality itself. That I discovered this distinction in a moment of crisis that forced me to stop thinking. My daughter was 8. We were hiking, and she slipped on wet rocks near a stream. Fell hard, hit her head, started bleeding, and in that moment, something happened that had never happened before. My thinking mind completely shut off, not intentionally, not as a practice or technique. It just stopped. There was no voice saying, "Oh no, she's hurt. What should I do? Is it serious? Should I panic? What if? What if? What if?" There was just perception and response. I saw her fall. Heard her cry, felt my body move toward her, registered the blood, assessed the situation, applied pressure to the wound, spoke calmly to keep her calm, got her to safety, all without a single thought. The action was faster, clearer, more effective than any action I'd ever taken where thinking was involved, because there was no delay between perception and response, no mental filter, no analysis paralysis, just direct awareness and appropriate action. The cut turned out to be superficial. She was fine within an hour, but I was changed because I'd experienced what it was like to operate without the thinking mind, to be completely present with what was happening without the layer of mental commentary, to listen to reality directly instead of listening to thoughts about reality. That experience showed me something crucial. The thinking mind is not your best source of information. It's not even a particularly accurate source of information. It's a story-making machine that's constantly one step behind reality, creating narratives about what's happening instead of simply perceiving what's happening. When you're thinking, you're in the past or future, comparing this moment to previous moments, planning for future moments, judging whether this moment measures up. The thinking mind cannot be in the present. That's not its function. Its function is to create stories about the present, not to experience the present. But listening, real listening, only happens in the present. It's direct perception without the story, direct awareness without the filter, direct experience without the interpretation. This is why I say listening is not thinking, because they're oppositely incompatible. When you're thinking, you're not listening. When you're listening, you're not thinking. They cannot happen simultaneously. The voice you've been listening to your entire life, the survival voice, the commentator, the constant narrator, that's all thinking. It's the thinking mind doing what it does, creating an ongoing story about your experience. But underneath that thinking, before that story begins, there's direct perception, direct awareness, direct knowing. That's where the deeper voice speaks. That's where truth lives. That's where real listening happens. And you can only hear it when you stop thinking about life and start experiencing it directly. Here's what this looks like in practical, everyday terms that you're having a conversation with your partner. They're telling you about their day, but you're not really listening. You're thinking about what they're saying, forming responses, relating their experience to your own, planning what you'll say when they finish, judging whether their reaction to events is appropriate. You're having thoughts about their words instead of receiving their words. This is why so many conversations feel unsatisfying. Both people are thinking about what the other is saying instead of actually listening to what the other is saying. Both people are one step removed from connection, trapped in their own mental commentary about the interaction instead of present in the interaction itself. Real listening would be hearing their words without immediately jumping to interpretation, sensing the emotion beneath their words, noticing what's not being said, being present with them in their experience instead of analyzing their experience from your mental distance. Or you're eating a meal, but you're not tasting it. You're thinking about it. Is it good? How does it compare to last time? Is it worth the calories? What will you eat later? Should you have ordered something else? The food is going into your mouth, but you're not experiencing it. You're experiencing thoughts about it. Real listening would be tasting the actual flavors, feeling the actual textures, experiencing the actual sensations, being present with the direct experience instead of the mental story about the experience. That I had a client, Michael, who realized he'd been living his entire life one step removed from actual experience, always thinking about what was happening instead of experiencing what was happening, always in his interpretation of life instead of in life itself. He described it as watching his life on a screen. He could see himself living, could narrate what was happening, could analyze and judge and plan, but he couldn't actually feel anything directly. Everything was filtered through the thinking mind first. This created a persistent sense of disconnection, of not being fully alive, of watching life happen rather than living it. He tried therapy, meditation, medication. Nothing really changed the fundamental problem. He was addicted to thinking, to analyzing, to being in his head instead of in his experience. Then during a session, I asked him to do something simple. Tell me 5 things you can hear right now. But don't think about them. Don't analyze them. Don't judge them. Just hear them and name them. He started, I hear cars outside, and I'm thinking they sound like they're going fast, which means stop. I interrupted. You're thinking about the cars. I asked you to hear the cars. Try again. Just the sound, not your interpretation. He closed his eyes. I hear a sound that's sort of rushing, like a whoosh. Good. What else? A humming, kind of electrical. Maybe the lights. Keep going. Your voice. The chair creaking. My own breathing. He opened his eyes. That was different. I wasn't thinking about the sounds. I was just hearing them. Exactly. That's the difference between thinking and listening. You just listened for the first time in this session, maybe the first time in years. Over the next few months, Michael practiced this distinction constantly, not as a meditation practice, as a life practice, in conversations, while eating, while working, while with his kids, noticing when he was thinking about his experience versus actually having his experience. He described the shift as coming back online, like he'd been operating on low power his whole life and suddenly had access to full capacity, more energy, more presence, more aliveness, not because anything external changed, because he stopped living in his thoughts about life and started living in life itself. Here's how to recognize when you're thinking versus when you're listening. You're thinking when there's a voice narrating your experience. There's analysis happening. There's judgment about whether this moment is good or bad, right or wrong. There's comparison to other moments. There's planning for what comes next. There's commentary running. You're listening when there's direct perception without narration. There's awareness without analysis. There's experience without judgment. There's presence without comparison. There's this moment only without past or future. There's silence where the commentary usually lives. Thinking feels busy, crowded, effortful. Listening feels spacious, clear, effortless. Thinking happens in your head. Listening happens in your whole body. Thinking creates distance from experience. Listening creates intimacy with experience. Thinking is always slightly stressful, even when you're thinking pleasant thoughts. Listening is inherently peaceful, even when what you're perceiving is challenging. The practice isn't to stop thinking. That's impossible. The practice is to recognize when you're thinking and choose, in moments that matter, to listen instead, to drop from your head into direct experience, to stop narrating your life and start living it. Tonight's practice teaches you the difference between thinking about your experience and having your experience, between mental commentary and direct perception, between living in your interpretation of reality and living in reality itself. You'll practice dropping out of thought and into direct listening, not permanently, just for moments, just enough to remember what it feels like to be fully here. Chapter 6. What you hear in the silence. It's been 6 days since I started the practice. 1 hour every night, just listening, not to a podcast, not to music, not to anything external. Just listening to what's here when all the noise stops. Tonight, I'm in my car again. Same garage, same position, but everything feels different. I turn off the engine, and instead of immediately jumping to what went wrong today or what I need to do tomorrow, I just stop. The first thing I notice is how loud the silence is. Not actual silence. There are sounds everywhere. The ticking engine, the neighbor's wind chimes, a plane passing overhead, my own heartbeat in my ears. But silence from the internal commentary, from the voice that usually fills every gap with words. And in that silence, I start to notice things I'd been too busy to perceive. There's a tightness in my jaw I've apparently been carrying all day. My shoulders are up near my ears. My stomach is clenched. My breath is shallow that I didn't know any of this 10 seconds ago. I was walking around with all of this tension, completely unaware of it, because I was listening to thoughts instead of listening to my body. I breathe deeper. The jaw loosens slightly. The shoulders drop half an inch. And underneath the physical tension, I notice something else. A feeling, not a thought about a feeling. An actual felt sense in my chest. Heavy, tight, familiar. I stay with it. Don't try to fix it or understand it or make it go away. Just listen to it the way I'd listen to music. And slowly, without any effort from me, it reveals what it is: grief. I'm carrying grief. About what? I don't immediately know. But it's there. Has been there. Maybe for weeks. Maybe longer. And I've been drowning it out with constant mental noise, never stopping long enough to hear what my own heart is trying to tell me. This is what happens when you finally stop and listen. You discover you've been carrying things you didn't know you were carrying, feeling things you didn't know you were feeling, living with truths you've been too busy to acknowledge. The silence isn't empty. It's full, fuller than all the noise ever was. When most people think about silence, they think about the absence of sound. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the absence of mental noise, the absence of the constant internal commentary, the absence of thinking. And when that mental noise stops, even for a few moments, you discover that the silence is full of information. Information you've been missing because you've been too busy listening to thoughts. Your body has been trying to tell you things. Where you're holding tension, what you're actually feeling beneath the thoughts about feelings. What you need but haven't been giving yourself. Your body knows when you're tired, when you're overwhelmed, when you're pushing too hard, when something is wrong. But you can't hear it when you're listening to thoughts instead of sensations. Your deeper wisdom has been trying to guide you. That subtle sense of yes or no. That gut feeling about people and situations. That intuitive knowing that something is right or something is off. But you can't hear it when you're listening to the survival voice's loud analysis instead of the deeper voice's quiet certainty. Your actual desires have been trying to surface. Not what you think you should want. Not what you've been conditioned to pursue, but what you actually long for. What makes you come alive? What matters to you specifically? But you can't hear them when you're listening to external expectations instead of internal truth. That I discovered this in layers over the first week of practice. Day 1, I discovered I was exhausted. Not just tired. Exhausted. Bone deep, soul tired, exhausted. I'd been powering through with coffee and willpower and sheer determination, ignoring all the signals my body was sending. When I finally stopped and listened, the exhaustion was obvious. Overwhelming. How had I not noticed this? Day 3, I discovered I was angry at my boss, who'd been taking credit for my work. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was being professional, that this was just how corporate life worked. But when I listened beneath those thoughts, there was clear, justified anger. Anger I'd been suppressing because the survival voice said, "Don't make waves. Don't risk your position. Don't be difficult." Day 5, I discovered I missed my best friend. We drifted apart over the past year, both busy with our lives, and I told myself it was natural, normal, fine. But when I listened to what was actually true, there was sadness, longing, a desire to reconnect that I'd been ignoring because the survival voice said, "You're too busy. Friendship is a luxury. Focus on what's urgent." Day 7, I discovered I wanted to write. Not professionally, not for anyone else, just for myself. This desire had been there for years, but I dismissed it as impractical, self-indulgent, pointless. But when I listened without judgment, the want was clear, simple, real. None of these discoveries came from thinking. They came from stopping the thinking and listening to what was underneath. They came from silence, or more accurately, from what the silence revealed. This is what makes the practice so powerful and so difficult. When you stop and actually listen, you hear things you've been avoiding. You feel things you've been suppressing. You know things you've been denying. And once you hear them, you can't unhear them. Once you know them, you can't unknow them. Once they're conscious, you have to decide what to do about them. The survival voice hates this. It wants you to keep thinking, keep analyzing, keep busy, keep distracted. Because as long as you're listening to thoughts, you're not listening to truth. And truth requires response. Truth demands change. Truth makes you uncomfortable in lives that don't fit anymore. But the deeper voice knows. The discomfort of facing truth is nothing compared to the suffering of avoiding it. The temporary pain of acknowledging what's real is nothing compared to the chronic pain of pretending what's not real is fine. When you finally stop and listen, you hear what you've been avoiding. And that's when real change becomes possible. Let me tell you what people actually hear when they start this practice, because it's remarkably consistent across different lives and situations. First, they hear exhaustion. Almost everyone is more tired than they realize, more depleted, more running on empty. The constant mental noise masks the physical reality. But when the noise stops, the body's truth becomes obvious. Second, they hear fear. Specific fears they've been managing with constant mental activity. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being found out as not enough, fear of loss, fear of change. The thinking mind runs constantly partly to avoid feeling these fears directly. When you stop thinking, you feel what you've been thinking about. Third, they hear unexpressed emotions. Anger they've been suppressing. Grief they've been postponing. Joy they've been too busy to fully feel. These emotions don't go away just because you ignore them. They wait. And when you finally create space to listen, they emerge. Fourth, they hear unmet needs. For rest, for connection, for meaning, for creative expression, for solitude, for adventure, for contribution. We learn to dismiss our needs as impractical or selfish, but needs don't disappear when dismissed. They persist, and they manifest as vague dissatisfaction, restlessness, or depression. Fifth, they hear truth about their lives. Relationships that aren't working, work that doesn't fit, habits that aren't serving them, ways they're living for others' approval instead of their own values. These truths are always present, but they're drowned out by mental noise. Silence reveals them. I had a client, Rachel, who started the practice reluctantly. She was a busy executive, mother of 3, wife of 15 years. She prided herself on her ability to handle everything, to keep all the plates spinning, to never complain or show weakness. After 3 days of the practice, she came to our session visibly shaken. I listened like you said, and all I heard was screaming. Not actual screaming, but this internal scream of, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep going like this. Something has to change. She started crying. She'd been holding this in for years, maybe a decade, presenting a capable front while internally drowning, never stopping long enough to hear how desperate she'd become, never creating space to acknowledge how unsustainable her life had become. What do I do with this? She asked. I can't unhear it now. I can't go back to pretending everything's fine. You're not supposed to go back, I said. You're supposed to listen. What is the scream telling you? She listened, not to thoughts about what she should feel or do, to the actual feeling beneath the words. And slowly, the message became clear. I need help. I can't do everything alone, and I don't want to do everything alone anymore. That realization, that simple, honest truth, became the beginning of real change. Not dramatic, blow up your life change, but authentic, sustainable change. She asked for help from her partner, from her team at work, from her extended family. She stopped performing superhuman capability and started being human, started admitting when she was overwhelmed, started saying no, started protecting time for rest. The changes weren't easy, but they were real. They were true. And they came from listening to what was actually happening inside her instead of maintaining the story she'd been telling herself about what should be happening. This is what you hear in the silence. Not what you think you should hear. Not what you want to hear. What's actually true? What's actually real? What actually needs your attention? And once you hear it, your responsibility is to honor it, to respond to it, to let it guide you toward a life that's true instead of a life that just looks good. Here's what different types of silence reveal. Physical silence. No external noise you hear how much tension you carry, where your body is tight, what physical needs you've been ignoring, your breath patterns, your actual energy level versus the energy you're pretending to have. Mental silence. No thought commentary, you hear emotions you've been thinking about instead of feeling. Intuitions you've been analyzing instead of trusting. Desires you've been dismissing. The difference between what you think you want and what you actually want. Relational silence. No conversation, you hear what's being communicated beneath words. What's not being said. What you've been afraid to say. The truth about connection, where it's real and where it's performance. Busyness silence. No activity, you hear what you've been avoiding by staying busy. What you're running from. What you're afraid will catch up with you if you stop. The questions you haven't wanted to answer. Each type of silence reveals something different, but all of them reveal truth. Truth about your body, your heart, your life, your relationships. Truth you can only hear when you stop filling every gap with noise. The practice is creating silence regularly enough that truth can surface before you bury it again. Tonight's practice deepens your relationship with silence. You'll create space to hear what your body is telling you, what your emotions are carrying, what your deeper wisdom knows. Not to analyze these things, not to fix them immediately, just to hear them, to acknowledge them, to let truth surface without judgment. Chapter 7. From Listening to Livinget's Day 14. 2 weeks of listening every night. 2 weeks of discovering things I didn't know I was carrying. 2 weeks of hearing truth I'd been avoiding. And tonight, something different happens that I'm sitting in my usual spot. The house is quiet. I've dropped into the silence the way I've been practicing. And instead of just receiving information, this hurts, this matters, this needs attention, I hear something else, a clear knowing. Not a thought, not a suggestion, a knowing. Tomorrow morning, You're going to tell your boss you're stepping back from the VP role. The survival voice immediately explodes. What? No, you can't do that. You just got that position. What will people think? What about the money? What about your career? What about security? This is crazy. Don't listen to that. But underneath the panic, the knowing remains. Calm, clear, certain, not you should consider, or maybe someday. Just, this is what's next. This is what's true. This is what you're going to do. I spend the next hour going back and forth. The survival voice listing every reason this is a terrible idea. The deeper voice simply repeating, this is what's next. By the end of the hour, I know which voice I'm going to follow. Not because I'm convinced it will work out well. Not because I have a plan. Not because I'm unafraid. But because the deeper voice is speaking truth, and I can't keep ignoring truth just because it's uncomfortable. The next morning, I have the conversation. It goes better than expected. My boss is surprised but understanding. We work out a transition plan. Within a week, I'm in a different role. Less prestige, more alignment, less performance, more presence. This is what listening leads to. Not just insight, action. Not just knowing what's true, living what's true. Not just hearing the deeper voice, following it. This is where the practice gets real, where it stops being just an interesting internal experience and starts changing your actual life. This is where listening becomes living. Here's what most people don't understand about this practice. Listening is not the end goal. Living is the end goal. Listening is just the mechanism that makes authentic living possible. You can listen to your body tell you you're exhausted and then ignore it and keep pushing. You can listen to your heart tell you a relationship isn't working and stay anyway. You can listen to your deeper wisdom tell you to make a change and choose safety instead. People do this all the time. They hear the truth and then ignore it. But that creates its own kind of suffering. Because once you hear truth clearly, ignoring it isn't neutral. It's active betrayal. Betrayal of yourself, of what you know to be real, of the part of you that's trying to guide you toward your actual life. The practice isn't complete until listening translates into living. Until the truth you hear in the silence becomes the truth you enact in your days. Until the deeper voice stops being just something you notice and becomes something you follow. This transition, from listening to living, is where most people get stuck. Because following the deeper voice almost always requires courage. It requires choosing truth over comfort, alignment over approval, reality over the story you've been telling yourself about your life. I learned this through a series of small choices that built on each other. First choice. I heard my body say, you need more sleep, and instead of dismissing it, I started going to bed earlier. This sounds trivial, but it wasn't. It meant saying no to late night work, no to scrolling through my phone, no to the survival voice that said, you should be more productive. You're wasting time. Sleep is for people who don't have ambition. Second choice. I heard my heart say, you miss your friend. And instead of telling myself I was too busy, I called him. We talked for an hour. It felt awkward at first. We let too much time pass. But underneath the awkwardness was real connection, real friendship, something I'd been starving for without realizing it. Third choice. I heard my intuition say, don't sign this contract, even though logically it looked good, and I trusted that knowing. Said no to a lucrative project because something about it felt off. Later found out the client had a reputation for not paying on time. My rational mind would have signed. My deeper wisdom saved me months of headache. Fourth choice. I heard my daughter say, Daddy, can we just hang out? No phones. And instead of half listening while checking email, I put the phone down, completely away. Spent 2 hours just being with her. building Legos, listening to her stories, being present. And those 2 hours mattered more than anything I could have accomplished with the phone. Each of these choices was small, but together, they were adding up to a different life. A life where I actually listened to what was true and acted accordingly. A life where the gap between what I knew and what I did was shrinking. The biggest choice came on day 16 that I was listening in my usual practice, and the deeper voice said something I didn't want to hear. You need to apologize to your wife for years of being physically present but emotionally absent, for performing the role of husband instead of being an actual partner, for hiding behind work and busyness and stress, for making her feel alone even though you were right there. Everything in me wanted to argue, to rationalize, to dismiss. The survival voice said, "She knows you love her. You work hard for the family. You don't need to make this weird by bringing up old stuff. Just keep doing better going forward." But the deeper voice was clear. This matters. This needs to be said. This needs to be healed. So that night, after our daughter went to bed, I sat down with my wife. And I said the things I'd been avoiding saying. Not because I wanted to. Not because it was comfortable. But because it was true. And I was done choosing comfort over truth. She cried. I cried. We talked for 3 hours. About things we'd both been avoiding. About disconnection neither of us wanted to admit. About the gap between what our marriage looked like and what it actually was. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. And it changed everything. Because truth, when finally spoken, creates the possibility for real connection, for real healing, for real relationship instead of performed relationship. That night taught me. Following the deeper voice doesn't make life easier. It makes life real. And real is harder than pretend. But real is also the only thing that actually satisfies. Here's what following the deeper voice looks like across different areas of life. In relationships. The deeper voice says, tell them how you really feel. You're scared of conflict, scared of being too much, scared of rejection. But you speak your truth anyway. Not aggressively, not with blame, just honestly. And something shifts. Maybe they understand. Maybe they don't. But you're no longer carrying unspoken truth. You're no longer pretending to be fine when you're not at work. The deeper voice says, this project isn't aligned with your values. The survival voice says, but it pays well, just do it. You decline anyway. You lose the money, but you keep your integrity. And 2 weeks later, a different opportunity appears that's both aligned and lucrative. Not because the universe rewards integrity. That's not guaranteed. But because when you're living in integrity, you're available for opportunities that fit instead of forcing yourself into opportunities that don't. With your health, the deeper voice says your body needs rest. The survival voice says successful people push through. You rest anyway. And in that rest, you discover you'd been running on stress hormones for months. You discover that productivity built on depletion is unsustainable. You discover that slowing down isn't weakness, it's wisdom. With your creativity, the deeper voice says, make something just for you. The survival voice says, only make things that can be monetized or that impress people. You create anyway, something no one will see. Something that serves no purpose except the joy of making it. And in that useless creation, you remember who you are beyond your productivity, beyond your usefulness, beyond your performance. With your time, the deeper voice says, stop checking your phone during meals. The survival voice says, but what if something important happens? You put the phone away anyway. And meals become actual experiences instead of just fuel consumption between notifications. Conversations become real instead of distracted. You taste your food. You see the people you're with. You're actually there instead of partially there. I had a client, James, who struggled with this transition from listening to living. He'd been practicing for 3 weeks. He heard the deeper voice clearly. He knew what it was telling him, but he kept not acting on it. I know I need to leave this relationship, he told me. I've known for 6 months. I hear it every time I listen, but I can't do it. I'm frozen. What does the survival voice say when you think about leaving? I ask. It says I'll be alone forever, that I'm 42 and starting over is impossible, that she hasn't done anything wrong enough to justify leaving, that I'm being selfish, that I should just be grateful for what I have. And what does the deeper voice say? It just says, this isn't it. This isn't your life. You're living someone else's life. And every day you stay, you're abandoning yourself. So why aren't you following that voice? Long pause. Because I'm afraid it's wrong. What if I leave and then realize I made a mistake? What if the survival voice is actually right? The survival voice is never wrong about danger, I said, but it's always wrong about life. Leaving might be dangerous to your security, your comfort, your stability, but staying is dangerous to your soul. So the question isn't which voice is right. The question is which danger you're willing to face. The danger of discomfort or the danger of dying without ever having truly lived. He left 2 months later, not impulsively, not angrily, just honestly. The relationship ended with sadness, but without drama. They both knew it had been over for a while. A year later, he told me, I didn't leave to find happiness. I left to stop abandoning myself. And it turns out, not abandoning yourself is what happiness actually is. That's the shift. From listening to living, from knowing to doing, from hearing truth to being truthed. Here's how to know if you're actually following the deeper voice or just listening to it, that you're just listening if you hear the truth, but make excuses for not acting. You know what needs to change, but wait for the right time. You understand what matters, but prioritize what's urgent. You feel the deeper voice, but follow the survival voice. You collect insights, but nothing in your life actually changes that you're following if. You feel fear, but act anyway. You face discomfort rather than avoid it. You choose truth over approval. You make changes that don't make sense to others, but make sense to you. Your life starts reflecting what you value, not just what you're afraid of. The gap between who you are and how you live gets smaller. Following doesn't mean dramatic overnight transformation. It means small daily choices to align with truth. Saying one uncomfortable thing, setting one boundary, resting when you need rest instead of when it's convenient, showing up honest instead of performing capable. Each choice builds on the last. Each act of integrity makes the next one easier. Not because courage grows, but because betraying yourself gets more painful than the discomfort of being honest. Tonight's practice asks you to identify one action the deeper voice has been requesting. Not the biggest, scariest one. Just one small step toward alignment. One conversation. One boundary. One honest admission. One change. Then commit to taking that action within the next 48 hours. Because listening without acting is just sophisticated avoidance. Chapter 8. The New Reality. It's day 21. 3 weeks since I started this practice. 3 weeks of listening for 1 hour every night. And everything has changed. Not everything external, though some of that has changed too, but everything internal. The way I experience life. The way I move through my days. The way I relate to myself, to others, to reality itself that I'm sitting in my car again. Same spot where this began. But I'm not the same person who sat here 3 weeks ago. That person was drowning in thoughts, carried by the current of constant mental noise, living in reaction to the survival voice's endless commentary. This person, the one sitting here now, has space, has choice, has presence. The survival voice still talks. It hasn't gone away. It's still doing its job, scanning for danger, offering its protective suggestions. But I'm not drowning in it anymore. I hear it the way I hear the wind in the trees outside. It's there. I can hear it. But I'm not swept away by it. I'm not believing that its assessment of reality is reality itself, and underneath that voice, consistently, reliably, clearly, I can hear the deeper voice. Not louder than before, but I've gotten better at listening, better at distinguishing signal from noise, better at recognizing truth when it speaks. Today was completely ordinary. Meetings, emails, dinner with my family. Nothing special, but I was present for it. Actually there instead of thinking about being there. Actually living it instead of narrating it. The difference is subtle but total. My daughter told me about her day at school. And I heard her, not just the words. Her, the excitement in her voice when she talked about her art project. The disappointment when she mentioned a friend who excluded her. The pride when she showed me her math test. I was there with her, in her experience, not thinking about my next meeting or replaying my last one. This is the new reality. Not a life without problems. Not a mind without thoughts. Not an existence without stress or challenge. But a life where I'm actually present. Where I'm listening more than I'm lost in thought. Where truth guides me more than fear. Where I'm living my actual life instead of the life I think I should be living. This is what changes in 21 days. Not everything, but the one thing that makes everything else possible. You learn to listen, really listen. And from that listening, a new reality emerges. Let me tell you what this new reality actually looks like, because it's probably different from what you're imagining. You don't become some blissed out Zen master who floats through life untouched by difficulty. You still face challenges. You still experience stress. You still feel fear, anger, sadness, frustration. Life doesn't stop being life, but your relationship to all of it changes fundamentally. When stress comes, you notice it earlier. You feel it in your body before it builds into overwhelm. And you respond to it. Rest, breathe, delegate, adjust, instead of powering through until you crash. When fear arises, you recognize it as the survival voice doing its job. You don't believe it's the truth about reality. You don't let it make your decisions. You acknowledge it. Thanks for trying to protect me. And then you choose based on what matters, not what's safe. When anger surfaces, you don't suppress it or explode with it. You listen to what it's telling you. What boundary was crossed? What need went unmet? What truth needs to be spoken? And you use the information without being controlled by the emotion. When sadness comes, you don't distract from it or think your way out of it. You're with it. You let it move through you. You honor what's being grieved. And it passes the way emotions always pass when you stop fighting them. The new reality isn't the absence of difficult experiences. It's presence with whatever experience is actually happening. It's living from truth instead of from thought. It's being guided by the deeper voice instead of being driven by the survival voice. For me, this showed up in ways both large and small. Large. I restructured my entire work life to align with what mattered instead of what looked impressive. Less money, less status, more meaning, more time, more alignment. The survival voice predicted disaster. Reality delivered satisfaction. Small, I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning. Started the day with 10 minutes of listening instead of 10 minutes of reacting. This one change shifted how I experienced entire days. Less reactive, more responsive, less driven by urgency, more guided by priority, large. I had the conversations I'd been avoiding. With my wife about our disconnect. With my business partner about our different visions. With my aging father about things unsaid for decades. Every conversation was uncomfortable. Every one created more authentic connection. Small. I started actually tasting my food. Sounds ridiculous, but for years I'd been eating while working, scrolling, watching, thinking. Food was just fuel. Now it's experience. Not every meal is transcendent, but every meal is actually tasted, actually lived. Large, I stopped performing. Stopped pretending to have it all together. Started admitting when I was struggling, confused, uncertain. Started showing up human instead of capable. And people responded with relief. Like they'd been waiting for permission to be human too. Small. I noticed when I was forcing myself to stay in conversations I was done with. Started honoring that knowing. I need to go now. Not rude. Just honest. And the conversations I stayed in became more real because I was actually choosing to be there. The new reality is built from thousands of small choices to honor what's true instead of what's convenient, to listen instead of react, to be present instead of performed, to follow the deeper voice instead of the survival voice. And here's what I didn't expect. The new reality is contagious. When you start living from truth, people around you notice. They don't always have words for what they're noticing, but they feel it. The presence, the authenticity, the groundedness. And it gives them permission to stop performing too. To be more honest, more real, more present. My wife started her own listening practice. My daughter, at 8 years old, sometimes says, "Daddy, I need quiet time," and goes to her room just to be still. My business partner started declining projects that didn't fit instead of taking everything out of fear that I'm not claiming credit for their changes. But I watched how presence invites presence, how authenticity creates space for authenticity, how one person choosing to live from truth somehow makes it easier for others to do the same. This is the new reality, not individual transformation, collective shift, one person at a time, choosing to listen, choosing to live from truth, choosing to be present. And gradually, the world around you reflects back something more real. Here's what people report after completing the full 21 days. First week, mostly they notice how much they'd been living in their heads. How constant the mental noise was, how little actual listening they've been doing. Many are shocked by how exhausted they are once they stop and actually feel their bodies. Some resist the practice because what they hear is uncomfortable. Some love it immediately because it's the first real rest they've had in years. Second week, the insights start coming. Truth they'd been avoiding surfaces. Patterns they hadn't noticed become obvious. The gap between how they're living and what they actually want becomes clear. This week is often difficult because awareness without immediate solution creates discomfort. Some want to quit. Some double down. Third week, changes start happening. Sometimes small, better sleep, more presence, less reactive. Sometimes large, difficult conversations, life decisions, relationship shifts. The listening is translating into living. The deeper voice is being followed, not just heard. This week often brings a mix of liberation and fear. Liberation from pretending. Fear of what comes next. Post 21 days. Most people don't stop the practice. Not because they're disciplined, because it's become essential, like sleeping or eating. They need this hour of listening the way they need rest, not as luxury, as necessity. And they notice immediately when they skip it, more reactive, more in their heads, more driven by thoughts than guided by truth. But here's what's crucial: the practice doesn't make life perfect, it makes life real. And real includes difficulty, challenge, uncertainty, pain. The difference is you're present for your actual life instead of lost in thoughts about your life. I had a client, Lisa, who completed the 21 days and then went through the hardest month of her life. Her mother was diagnosed with cancer. Her company went through layoffs. Her teenage son got in trouble at school. Everything hit at once. I thought this practice was supposed to make things better, she said, angry and exhausted. But everything is falling apart. Is it falling apart? I asked. Or are you just present with how hard things actually are? She sat with that. I guess, in the past, I would have handled this by going numb, working obsessively, drinking too much, avoiding everything I was feeling. I would have looked capable on the outside while falling apart on the inside. And now I'm crying. I'm feeling everything. I'm asking for help. I'm being honest with people about how hard this is. I'm showing up for my mom's appointments fully present instead of partially there while thinking about work. I'm talking to my son instead of yelling at him. I'm falling apart visibly instead of invisibly. Which version is actually falling apart? She smiled, sad but real. The old version was falling apart. This version is just living through hard things, actually living through them instead of avoiding them. That's the new reality. You don't bypass difficulty. You meet it. You don't escape pain. You feel it. You don't perform capability. You live honestly. And somehow, that's both harder and more sustainable than the old way. Because the old way, living in thoughts, following the survival voice, performing instead of being present, that was exhausting. Constant vigilance, constant pretending, constant managing of image and narrative and story. The new way, listening, following truth, being present, that's difficult. But it's real. And real, even when hard, is less exhausting than pretend. Even when performing looks easier, to here's what the new reality looks like in daily practice. Morning. You wake up and before reaching for your phone, you listen to your body, to what today needs, to what matters most. 3 minutes. That's all. But those 3 minutes set the tone for everything that follows. Throughout the day, you notice when you've left the present, when you're thinking about experience instead of having experience, when you're performing instead of being, and you come back again and again, not perfectly, just repeatedly. Decisions, you don't just think through options. You listen to how each option feels in your body. You notice which choice the survival voice prefers and which one the deeper voice knows is true. You choose truth more often than fear. Interactions, you're more present with people. You hear what they're actually saying instead of planning your response. You notice what's being communicated beneath words. You're honest instead of polite when honesty serves connection better. Evening, you listen again. You review the day not with judgment, but with curiosity. Where were you present? Where were you lost in thought? What did the deeper voice say that you followed? What did it say that you ignored? What wants attention now? This becomes your life. This becomes normal. This becomes who you are. Tonight is your final guided practice. Tomorrow, you wake up in your new reality. Not because everything has changed, but because you have changed. Your relationship to thought has changed. Your access to truth has changed. Your capacity to be present has changed. You've learned to listen. And from that listening, you can build a life that's true. I'm sitting in my car again. It's been 4 years since that first night. 4 years since I sat here after a terrible day and accidentally discovered the power of listening. For years of practice. For years of following the deeper voice. For years of choosing presence over performance, truth over comfort, reality over the story, I thought I should be living. My life looks different now. I work differently. I relate differently. I parent differently. I show up differently. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but more real, more aligned, more alive. And here's what I want you to know as you complete these 21 days. This is not the end of a program. This is the beginning of a life. A life where you listen more than you're lost, where truth guides you more than fear, where you're present more than you're pretending. The deeper voice will keep speaking. Some days it will whisper something gentle. Some days it will shout something uncomfortable. Your job is simply to keep listening, to honor what you hear, to follow where it leads. The survival voice will keep speaking too. It will keep offering its protective commentary. It will keep assessing danger, predicting disaster, trying to keep you safe. Your job is not to eliminate it. That's impossible, but to recognize it for what it is. A well-meaning mechanism with outdated information. Thank it, and choose based on truth instead of fear. Life will keep happening. Challenges will come. Pain will come. Difficulty will come. The practice doesn't protect you from life. It teaches you how to be present with life, how to meet what comes with awareness instead of avoidance, how to respond instead of react, how to live instead of just survive. Some days you'll forget everything you've learned here. You'll get swept up in thoughts. You'll follow the survival voice into catastrophic thinking. You'll perform instead of being present. That's normal. That's human. When you notice, you simply come back. You listen again. You return to what's true. There's no failure in this practice. Only returning. Only again. Only now. The people around you will notice something different about you. They might not have words for it, but they'll feel your presence, your authenticity, your groundedness. And some of them will ask, what changed? You can tell them about this practice, where you can simply keep being present, keep following truth, keep listening. Your life will be the teaching.so tonight. As you complete your final hour of guided practice, know this: you're not alone in this. Thousands of people are doing this practice. Millions have discovered what you're discovering: the power of listening, the guidance of the deeper voice, the freedom that comes from living in truth instead of being driven by thought. Tomorrow, you wake up in your new reality. Not dramatically different, subtly, fundamentally different. You'll still have the same life, but you'll be more present with it, more honest in it, more alive in it. Listen for 1 hour every night, for 21 days. That was the promise. You've completed it. You've arrived. Now the practice becomes your life. Now listening becomes who you are. Now you live from truth instead of from thought. Now you're awake. Now you're here. Now you're alive. Welcome to your new reality. The journey begins now.